Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Racha Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Zechariah, the 14th chapter. And, in this chapter, pretty much, I believe this is the last chapter of the book of Zechariah. And in this chapter, it pretty much covers, the time of Jacob's trouble. All right, going into the nuclear destruction, okay, and the Lord delivering the elect. All right, really delivering us, the nation of Israel. Okay, and so I have a couple of precepts here to go with it, but let's get into it, and Lord willing, to be edifying to the elect. So as you can see, it says God will battle Jerusalem's foes. Now this is Zechariah chapter 14 verse 1. Behold, the day of the Lord Yahweh cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. Now, this day of the Lord that we're dealing with, there's many other precepts that also refer to this time of the day of the Lord. Okay, and when you deal with the prophecy of the time of Jacob's trouble, the time of the nuclear missiles, the time of Yahushai making his return, right? These are all a part of that time of the day of the Lord. Okay, because this is the time in which the Lord is going to bring that great judgment upon the earth, and also that deliverance for the nation of Israel, starting with the elect. So in this time, as it says, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. And when you read this in more modern English, and maybe a more modern translation like the NLT, we actually have it on here on the side. Okay, what it reads is concerning the part about thy spoil being divided in the midst of thee. It says here, watch, for the day of the Lord is coming, when your possessions will be plundered right in front of you. Right, so in this time, right, leading into that time of Jacob's trouble, you're going to have, as we read of in 2nd Esdras 15, about, people breaking into other people's houses, basically taking their goods, and people being helpless, right, to defend themselves or to do anything about it. Okay, that's why it mentions in the midst of thee. All right, and it says here in verse 2, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Now, as it says here, I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. We know that Jerusalem representing Israel, you have Jerusalem the place, and then you have Jerusalem the people. Okay, and yes, even on a physical sense, pursuant to the book of Revelation, the 20th chapter, and around the 7th verse, right, it mentions one example of like Gog coming against or encamping about the camp of the saints, right? So you will have nations actually come against the actual land, which even Ezekiel the 38th chapter, as they've linked on here, goes into that, right? Russia coming over there into that land, along with other nations, right? Allies coming to battle against the actual land of Jerusalem, which right now you have Israelites among them, but you have predominantly the Edomites, okay, the Amalekites dwelling over there. But you also have, you're also going to have during this time nations or people coming against the actual Israelites, okay. And a quick precept here, we'll go to the book of 2nd Esdras, chapter 16, verse 70, and it reads, for there shall be in every place and in the next cities a great insurrection upon those that fear the Lord. Okay, and who are those by nationality? Those are Israelites, right? And so going back to Zechariah, you're going to have in this time of Jacob's trouble, that's why, for example, it's called Jacob's trouble. But even relating to the prophecy of Jacob's trouble, it's not going to be only Israelites that are going to be going through the things that are going to be happening, right? You're going to have Edomites and people of other nations going through the troubles that are going to come during the time of Jacob's trouble. However, it's known as Jacob's trouble because this is the Lord bringing this against us, primarily because of the wickedness. Okay, so you're going to have, pursuant to Zechariah 14:2, right, these nations that are going to come against Jerusalem, the people, but also against the land. And the city shall be taken and the houses rifled, right? So you can imagine, a time where cities are being, broken down, houses are being ransacked, right? It says, and the women ravished. So when a woman is ravished, it means that she's basically taken against her will, right? Forced into, acts as today will call sexual assault, against her will, right? And as it said, and this isn't going to be just upon Israelite women, okay, but this is going to be upon women and people in general, okay? It says, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. So you're going to have, as it says, half of the people shall go forth into captivity. So you're going to have during this time, as all hell is breaking loose, as people are ransacking buildings, women are getting taken, you're also going to be having people getting rounded up, okay, and taken captive into these different camps, right? These concentration camps and places of captivity, right? When you go to the book of Second Esdras, continuing in Second Esdras 16, and verse, let's see, after verse 70, right, it talks about the burning multitude, wrath being kindled against you, and them feeding some of you being idle with things offered unto idols, right? And that's those camps that they're going to be taking people into. And over there, you're going to be held captive, right, against your will, without the freedom, okay, or liberty. Now, actually, what I want to go to, dealing with the second part of this part here, where it talks about the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Now, reading this in the NLT, okay, it translates, or is read as, it says here, half of the population will be taken into captivity, and the rest will be left among the ruins of the city, right? And real quick, if you go to, this is also similar to what Ezra saw, right? Second Ezra 16:31. Even so, in those days, there shall be 3 or 4 left by them that search their houses with the sword. Okay, so you can imagine, right, this site here where you're having people fighting against each other. You're having cities that at one point were cities where you would have tourists and people come to sightsee, and now they've been turned into scenes out of movies like I Am Legend and so on, right? And you can imagine women being dragged and taken against their will. You can imagine people being round up and thrown into isolation camps, quarantine camps, what do they call those? FEMA camps, right? It says here, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city, right? So obviously they're not going to get everyone, but you can imagine some of those that are left hiding. Okay, so you can actually imagine or get the visual from these events that are going to be taking place during this time. Verse 3, then shall the Lord Yahweh go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. See, so then, right, you're going to have Jacob's trouble. You're going to have the chaos going on. People are going to be affected. Israelites, heathens, all going to be affected. And then you're going to have the Lord, as it says, fight against those nations. And that's going to be ultimately when he gathers them, okay, and he brings that judgment upon them by way of that destruction, otherwise known as that World War III. Okay, because it's going to start off with them going against each other, but even in doing that, the Lord is dragging them, okay, to, let's actually get that real quick. This is Zechariah Chapter 3, verse 8. Let me zoom in on here. Don't know why to zoom, so yeah. Anyway, it says here, therefore wait ye upon me, saith the Lord, until the day that I rise up to the prey. And so who are the prey? The prey are these other nations. For my determination is to gather the nations, that I may assemble the kingdoms to pour upon them mine indignation. And how is the Lord going to do that? By way of those missiles and the chariots that are going to come, and they're going to take out the armies of these nations. Even all my fierce anger, for all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. And when it talks about all the earth, it's not the whole inhabited planet, but certain parts of the earth, because the word earth in the Hebrew is aratiza, which means land. So it doesn't mean that the entire planet is going to be devoured, but rather particular places, i.e. Babylon, aka America, okay, the land of Israel, and certain other parts as well. Okay, so that is one way, or one example, as to how the Lord is going to fight against those nations, by gathering them to the valley of Yahweh Shabbat, the Lord's judgment, and bringing that destruction upon them. Okay, now you also have here, one second, let me, yeah, I wonder why this is so zoomed out. But this is Revelation chapter 12, verse 7. It says here, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. So this right here, now this is going to happen in the midst getting to the end of Jacob's trouble. Right, because at that point is where those missiles are going to start flying. World War III is going to go nuclear. The Lord is going to return with the holy angels, right, with the heavenly host, and they're going to defend Jerusalem. Okay, and they're going to fight against the military and the armies of these other nations. So when you go into that, right, that's why it mentions Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, which the dragon represents in this time, okay, Esau's power structure, if you put it like that. Okay, in the ancient world, it was the Roman Empire, which came back today as America and NATO and the EU and all of that. But this is primarily going to be that military force headed by Esau that is going to fight against the Lord, and as it says, and his angels. So they're allies that are going to fight along with them. But in verse 8, it tells us that they prevailed not, because the Lord is going to be fighting against them. So going back to Zechariah chapter 14. It says here, then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle. And that part, fought in the day of battle, meaning basically how the Lord fought in old times, right, in past times. So the Lord has defended us many times before, and this time he's going to do it again, but on a grand scale. Verse 4. Let me see if those are all the precepts I had on that. Cool. Verse 4 says here, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof, meaning it's going to be parted asunder in the midst thereof, toward the east and toward the west. So you can imagine that mountain, right, being split. Okay, it says, and there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. So if you imagine on a literal sense, and like for a visual, a mountain being basically split in half, and you having half of it one way, half of it another way, and then that valley in the midst, right? Which here, this represents, that the destruction that's going to come along with the Lord, right? And actually, when you go into the word feet, one of the uses here they have is seraphim, right, which goes into the angels, the chariots, and so on. And so you can imagine upon the return of the Lord, which I have there are precepts on that show that you are going to have literally and figuratively, the mountains and the hills being destroyed before the Lord, because it's going to be a day of great destruction. So let me actually look up the word here that I'm looking for. 1 second. His feet. Right, so it says here ragal, foot, leg. Right, it says of seraphim, cherubim, right, idols, animals, tables. Okay, so going back, let's get a precept for that. Real quick, this is Revelation chapter. Let me see, which one is it? 16, right? This is Revelation chapter 16, verse 17. And it reads, "And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, It is done." Because there were seven angels, right, with seven vials. And each of those, that each angel that poured out their vial represented some form of judgment or destruction that was coming upon the earth. And the seventh was going to be that complete, the last one, the finishing one, which is where the missiles do that complete destruction. Okay. Verse 18, "And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth. So mighty an earthquake, so great." So can you imagine that? And this is why in the book of Isaiah, it mentions that the earth is going to reel to and fro like a drunkard. Can you imagine the actual planet shaking, and moving, based on the impacts of the missiles hitting in different parts, causing even beneath the surface level, those tectonic plates that have, bridged against each other, causing the tension to cause some of them to shift. Because when those plates that are etched against each other, there's a lot of tension built there, and whenever they shift, that's when it causes what we know on the surface as an earthquake, right? And then you have the fault lines and all of that. So you can imagine, with the force of all these missiles hitting the planet, it can force, right, these plates that are, let me actually just put it up here. If you look at tectonic plates diagram, there you go. Let's see if we can have yeah, so these are some examples, right? So you can have these plates as they they're moving. Some of them clash, and they have a certain force or a certain direction they're trying to go in. Now obviously they're not straight like this. Some of them, it's earth, so you might have the edges be jagged. And so you can imagine, if this one is going in this direction and this one is going in this direction, and they clash with each other and their edges are jagged and they basically get stuck, right? And then that tension starts to build, because this is trying to go here, this is trying to go here, but they're stuck right there. And so if you take the slightest force, maybe the force of a missile or something hitting, that breaks off, it forces them to break off and release that sudden tension, then you have that ripple effect that comes up to the surface, and then we see, or at least what we have is those quakes. Okay. Nevertheless, going back to Revelation 16, and verse 19, "And the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God." And we know that great city is pertaining to Babylon the Great. When you go to Revelation, the 17th chapter, the angel also mentions that. So you can imagine this place being destroyed and actually being divided. Okay. And as it says, "It came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath." So basically, to have her drink of that cup is a metaphorical way of representing judgment, having them undergo the judgment of the Lord. Verse 20, and here's the key part that I wanted to get, right? "And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found." Right? And we know this is going to take place during the return of the Lord, the day of the Lord, right? And so you're going to have, right, in the scriptures, you have mountains and hills that metaphorically represent governments and basically bodies of authorities. But then you also have actual literal mountains and hills, okay, which both in some of these areas are going to be destroyed, right? And so in this case, as we're reading, the mountains were not found. Verse 21, "And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. And men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, for the plague thereof was exceeding great." Now this hail is referring to the nuclear missiles. This is what the Apostle John described it as when he saw it. But this actually represents the nuclear missiles falling from the sky, all right, and destroying things. And you're going to have people that are going to be, screaming out for help, and as it says, men blaspheme God because of the plague of the hail. So people are going to know that this is the workings of the Most High, but because it's coming in a form of destruction, you're going to have people, like today, right? They speak against it and speak against the Most High and all of that whenever bad things happen, right? It says, for the plague thereof was exceeding great, because there was a lot of destruction. So going back to the book of Zechariah 14:4, this is pretty much representing that the time of the Lord, when the time of the Lord comes, right, when the Lord makes that return, you are going to have mountains and hills and all of that being destroyed, being broken up, as a form of destruction. Verse 5, and ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal, which is, when you look it up, it's a region, as they mentioned, near Jerusalem. It says, yea, and why are they going to flee? Because there's going to be a lot of destruction, a lot of chaos, right? Land being broken up, the earth shaking, buildings falling. So people are going to be fleeing here. Now, here it mentions, right, this region, Azal, right, being a region near Jerusalem. But in actuality, people are going to be scrambling and fleeing from all over the world as chaos is hitting in different parts. It says, yea, ye shall flee, like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. So here Zechariah is making a reference to something that actually happened years ago, right, in Israel. And there's not too much context on it in the scriptures on that particular earthquake that took place. But, according to the record here, there was some major earthquake that took place during the time of King Uzziah during some time back, which I believe in the book of Amos is actually a reference to it here in Amos chapter 1 verse 1. And it reads, the words of Amos, who was among the herdmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam the son of Joash king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. Right, so this is something that was known, right, something that happened, but there's not too much context as to what exactly was taking place in detail there. So going back to Zechariah 14:5, right, so people are going to be fleeing. It says here, and the Lord Yahweh my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. Right, so like we mentioned above, the Lord is going to send Yahweh Shai back along with the angels, right, the heavenly host, and also to deliver the elect. Okay. Verse 6, and it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark. Verse 7, but it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord Yahweh, not day nor night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. And I read both these verses together because they're both talking about the same thing. And what this is talking about is the nuclear missiles. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up on here, and then we'll explain it. But I'm going to pull up on here. I looked this up, so it should be in my history here. Let's see. Here we go. So I think this is a good example here. Now what I did was I looked up here just because I remembered this visual in my head, which was, there are times when you see a city, like when you watch some of these videos of certain cities being hit by rockets or missiles or drones and stuff like that, especially if it's at nighttime, right, or even in the daytime, you'll see that the brightness, okay, of those rockets or missiles hitting for that split second, because of the explosion, actually makes it look like it's daytime, and then the light goes back, and then it goes back dark again. Okay, so when you go back to the book of Zechariah, verse 14, verse 6, when it says here, it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be shall not be clear nor dark. This is going into, if the missiles start flying in the daytime, you're gonna have the obviously the sun is gonna be out, but then with the entourage of missiles flying, then you're gonna have this darkness. Okay, where, yeah, there's still going to be some light around, but there's going to be the shadow of all these objects in the air causing that darkness, okay, to cover the land. And keep in mind, at the same time, you're also going to be having the chariots, all right, which are also going to be blocking the skies as well. Okay, so you can imagine that in the daytime, where the darkness casts that shadow, making it almost look like it's night, but it's not night. It's also, daytime at the same time. And if they fly in the nighttime, then you can imagine it being dark, but the light of the missiles hitting, exploding, the fire pushing them, making it look in some parts for a split second or however long those explosions last, as though it's day. So it's not really clear. It looks like it's night, but then there's light. It looks like it's day, but then there's darkness. And that's what Zechariah is describing here as that day, where the light is not clear, whether it's like dark or it's night or it's day. Verse 7, as it says, but it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord, right? So that day is only the Lord knows when that day is going to be, of course, and how he's going to make that happen. But as we're describing, this is going to be by way of those missiles. So as it says, not day nor night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. Okay, so now let me actually show a visual so you can maybe get a picture of what I'm talking about here. So you can see it's pretty dark, right? It's nighttime here. But then you have now this if you didn't know what was going on here, you could mistake this for like the sun rising in some places, right? Because you have that light going on, but there's a better scene that comes along here. And I just pulled this up randomly too, so this I'm not playing this for any reasons as the title says, but just really for the visual. All right, so that was one right there. So let's actually go back. There you go. Let's go back to this one here. Perfect. So you can see here how these weren't even nuclear. These were just like regular missiles that were being shot off. Some were being intercepted and so on and so forth. But you pretty much get the idea, right? There are some missiles or some explosions that are so bright upon impact that they can make nighttime look like daytime, at least for a couple of seconds, because of how bright the impact is, right? And you can see an example here. And then after that brightness goes away, then it immediately goes back to being dark, right? It goes back to being nighttime. So just to give a visual example here, okay, of was being spoken of here in Zechariah the 14th chapter, in 6th and 7th verses. So continuing to the 8th verse, and it shall be in that day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the former sea, and half of them toward the hinder sea. In summer and in winter shall it be. Now, this the living waters here, when you go into it, it pretty much represents like a revival, right? Let me actually go into living chaya, as it says here, living, live, reviving, right? Lively, active, sustenance, life. And this is going to be, when the Israelites are established back in power, okay, i.e. in the kingdom of heaven. And so that's why it says that it's going to go out from Jerusalem, because the Lord is going to establish us back in Jerusalem, or back in Israel. And by putting us in that position, right, we're going to bring that life back into the earth. Okay, it's really going to flow from Jerusalem, okay, by which the world is going to be revived or rejuvenated again. And that's what is being likened onto as living waters going forth from Jerusalem into the former sea, right, and into the hinder sea, and basically bringing forth life into those areas, right? And it says here, in summer and in winter shall it be, basically meaning this is going to be continual. Okay, now when you read this in the NLT in verse 8, it reads, on that day life-giving waters will flow out from Jerusalem, half toward the Dead Sea and half toward the Mediterranean, flowing continually in both summer and winter. Okay, so in other words, like I just explained, it's going into when we are established, okay, life is going to be brought back into the earth again, right? Things are going to be renewed and refreshed again, okay, continually. And that's why the kingdom of heaven is going to be a time of peace. And in the book of Revelation, the 20th chapter, it talks about that, how after the 1,000 years, you had even the nations that were restored. The rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were fulfilled. So when you actually go into that, the lived not again, meaning that these other nations weren't restored back to a normal life again until the 1,000 years were fulfilled. But the point being, that's because they're going to be serving captivity. However, after that, they're going to be restored to a normal life. And that's going to be because we are going to be in power. So now let's go to the book real quick, Romans chapter 8, verse 19. It says, for the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. And who are the sons of God? The sons of God are the children of Israel. Okay. And in this time, right, we always emphasize the elect, because really when the Lord comes back, he's going to deliver the elect. He's going to start them off, right? The nation is going to come back. But the restoration of Israel is going to start obviously with Yahushua and the elect. And through that body is where the rest of the nation is going to come back, okay, in their right mind. So that's why we always emphasize starting with the elect. Nevertheless, why is the earnest expectation of the creature waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God? Because Proverbs 29:2, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. Why is this? Because when the righteous are in authority, they implement the right laws, the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Heavenly Father. They rule in a fair and righteous way, and that promotes life. And because of that, the people rejoice. The people are able to live a life, even those that are heathens, by living under the rule that has been implemented by the sons of God. They would have that restoration back to a normal life. And they would, to some degree, also be able to enjoy the earth as a paradise. Okay, of course, being subject unto us. This is why they're waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God, because right now the wicked are bearing rule and people are mourning because you're not living, you're surviving. Okay, so going back to Zechariah 14, continuing from verse 9, and the Lord Yahweh shall be king over all the earth. In that day shall there be one Lord Yahweh, and his name one. Yeah, Yahweh in the name of Yahushua, his son, right? Yahweh Bahasham Yahushua. So in that time, there's going to be no confusion as to who the one and true living power is. Okay, that the name of the Lord, the reputation, the fear of the Lord, it's all going to be restored back into the earth again. Verse 10, all the land shall be turned as a plain from Gibeah to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, right? And these are areas, regions, they give you approximations, right? Because it's hard to pinpoint exactly where these were. But these are regions over there in the land of Israel. Now, it says here, it shall be turned to a plain, right? Because it's going to be destroyed. It's going to be broken down in this war, in this destruction. And yeah, this is going to happen, as it mentions, these regions over there in Israel or near Jerusalem. And this is going to happen in that land, but it's not going to be exempt, right? It's not going to be isolated to just that region. You're also going to have places like America that's going to be turned into a plain. Okay, but dealing with Jerusalem, as we continue to read, it says, and it shall be lifted up and inhabited in her place. So it's going to be destroyed, right, by this war. The Lord is going to use that destruction to cleanse the land, but then it's going to be built back up, and then it's going to be inhabited in her place. Is going to be inhabited by the true inhabitants of that land, meaning the Lord is going to, after delivering us, he's going to have that place built back up, and he's going to put us back there. And that's also in the book of Baruch, the 2nd chapter, the last few verses. From Benjamin's gate onto the place of the first gate, onto the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananeel onto the king's winepress. And these are locations in the land of Israel, right? Just saying that, it's going to be built back up and it's going to be inhabited. It's going to be full of Israelites from this location to this location. Like today, if you were to say from like, I don't know, from like, from Times Square to like, I don't know, Wall Street or something, these back then, right? These locations were known. And in this time, we're like thousands of years into the future. So, we don't remember, at least know the exact location. Oh, where was the king's wine press? But these were areas that were known back in Jerusalem back then. Like you had, for example, the King's Highway, which is a particular path when you look it up, okay, traveling from the south around Egypt all the way up north to, Damascus and so on. Okay. So all it's saying here is that, the Jerusalem is going to be built back up and inhabited, okay, from one end to the other. Verse 11, and men shall dwell in it, right? These being the actual Israelites, and there shall be no more utter destruction. So this is going to be during the kingdom of heaven. After the time of Jacob's trouble, after the time of the nuclear war, the missiles have already, done the destruction they need to do, and the Lord has delivered his elect. And then righteousness has been established in the earth. Peace has been established in the earth. The nations they learned war no more. All right. Then, as it says, we're going to dwell in it, and there shall be no more utter destruction, because the prophecy is going to be fulfilled and the judgment is going to have passed. But Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. Verse 12. So now in verse 12, it goes into a bit more detail as to some of the verses that we mentioned above, right? About the, the missiles, the destruction. Okay, so reading verse 12, it says, and this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. So keep in mind, when we read up above, the Lord mentioned that he would, then the Lord is going to fight against the nations that came against us, right? In verse 3, then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, right? So coming down to verse 12, it shows you this is how the Lord is going to do it. And this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. So all the people that came against us, which is pretty much all these nations, right? There's a precept that mentions which one of these nations had not had a part in our downfall, roughly paraphrasing. And also when you read the book of Psalms, the 83rd chapter, it goes into the list of these nations that have conspired against us. So as it reads, their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. Now, this is going to happen on a literal sense. And when it says that, it doesn't mean they're going to turn into zombies. All right. The way that this is going to happen is by way of heat, fire, thermonuclear fire, which is going to burn, okay, these people. But also, it also represents the eyes consuming away in their holes, meaning the things, their visions, their aspirations. Psalms, what's that? 49 and 11. Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue, from generation to generation. All that is going to consume away, right? As this destruction hits, all of those plans is all going to be brought down. And the tongue, right, which is in the mouth, the scriptures say that of the tongue cometh life and death, right? Because of what you say. All of that is also, all their great words and all of that is also going to be consumed away, right? It's going to be destroyed, because their kingdom is going to be destroyed. They're not going to have any power, and they're going to be brought down and subjected. So in a literal sense, the missiles are going to burn them, okay? But also in a figurative sense, all their plans and ambitions are also going to be brought down and destroyed along with them. Verse 13, and it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from the Lord Yahweh shall be among them. The word tumult going into trouble or chaos, right, shall be among them. And they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor. And this is going to go into that infighting, the wars between each other, civil wars, class wars, race wars. And this is going to happen all around the world, but primarily it's going to be like the main focal point is going to be here in America. where these things are going to be taking place. And you can already see, prelims of that now. Okay. So that's what it means by people laying their hands on their neighbor and rising up, right? Meaning they're going to be fighting against each other, which the prophet Ezra also saw that in Second Ezra. He mentions that, right? Second Ezra 15, about one people standing up to fight against another with swords in their hands. Verse 14, and Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the heathen round about shall be gathered together. So now, as it mentions, Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem. Yeah, because as this is going down, you're going to have Israelites that are also going to be in here, right? As the the race wars and so on are kicking off. Now, it says Judah because Judah is the head, and Judah is going to start. The scriptures talk about who shall rouse him up, but it's not going to be just Judah. You're going to have the other tribes that are also going to be in here, okay, taking part. And it says at Jerusalem because, yeah, you're going to have actual Israelites in there, but you're also going to have Israelites around the world that are also going to be a part of that fight. Okay, and a quick precept that comes to mind is Micah chapter 5 verse 8, which reads, and the remnant of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles in the midst of many people, as a lion among the beasts of the forest, as a young lion among the flocks of sheep, who if he go through, both treadeth down and teareth in pieces, and none can deliver. So you can imagine the Israelites, right, as it mentions the remnant of Jacob, being likened unto lions among sheep, just straight, as they say today, wilding out. Thine hand shall be lifted up upon thine adversaries, and all thine enemies shall be cut off. So going back to Zechariah, you're going to have, as the wars, the fights, the one people against another kicks off, you're going to have Israelites, partaking in that. Okay. But also, when the Lord comes back, you're going to have, when the true fight begins, you're going to have the Lord and, the elect, fight against the different armies of the world as well. Okay. And that's what's going to lead to the next part here, as it mentions, and the wealth of the heathen round about shall be gathered together. And there's many precepts on that, right? About sucking the breast of kings, the forces of the Gentiles being brought onto us, going into their riches. Okay. Gold and silver and apparel in great abundance. Why? Because when all this is over, the Lord is going to raise up, right, the nation of Israel again, the house of David, under Yahushua, and everybody is going to be subject under us, and they're going to bring their wealth and riches and all of that to us. As the scriptures say, our gates are going to be open continually, that the nations may bring, their riches. Verse 15, and so shall be the plague of the horse, of the mule, of the camel, and of the ass, and of all the beasts that shall be in these tents, as this plague. And we read what the plague was, right? That fire destroying it. So in whatever region or land that plague hits, right, where the fire devours, it's not going to just devour people, right? The horses, the mules, the camels, the ass, the beasts, all of them are also going to suffer that, which is, they're going to be destroyed. They're going to be burnt up. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord Yahweh of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So what's going to happen here is, after the war, after we have subjected the world under righteousness, the nations that are left, right, because you're going to have a good portion of them die in the Third World War, but those that are left are going to learn the ways of righteousness. They're going to keep our laws, statutes, and commandments, and our holy days as well, which is why I mentioned them going up from year to year, which is actually in our law, right? 3 times shall you come to Jerusalem to keep the high holy days. And as it mentions here, they're going to come to worship Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai and keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Verse 17, and it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. So any nation or people or family that refuses, or tries to buck up, are going to suffer the consequence, right? And what happens when you don't have rain? You have famines, you have droughts. You can go and read the book of Genesis and see just how dire life can become when you don't have water. Okay, you can read about in the book of Kings what happened during the famines because of the drought, right, that Elijah had caused when he prayed to the Lord. How mothers were eating their children, right? People were selling doves' dung and asses' heads, right, for money to eat and to use to cook and all of that. So a nation not having rain is pretty much going to lead to a lot of hardships. They can't have water to drink. They can't feed their cattle. They can't water their grass. They can't plant crops. So it'll be like almost like a spiritual sanction upon them, which will make life difficult. So it'll be, a harsh punishment, which is to make sure that these nations don't get out of line. Verse 18, and if the family of Egypt go not up, and come not up, and come not, that have no rain, there shall be the plague, wherewith the Lord Yahweh shall smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Right. So, for example, if the family of Egypt did not come up, then guess what? They're gonna suffer that consequence that we just mentioned above. And it's not going to be isolated to just not having rain, right? That's just one example given here. But we're going to have the power to be able to either like send plagues among them, or whatever it is, just as the Lord did to us, right? Whenever we transgressed against him. Verse 19, this shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. In that day shall there be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the Lord Yahweh's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. And what this is saying in a metaphorical way is that everything is going to be made holy, right? The bells upon the horses, when you read in another translation, it goes into like this holiness unto the Lord will be inscribed, right, upon even the bells that are upon the harnesses of the horses. And then the pots in the Lord's house are going to be like the bowls before the altar. And those bowls are sanctified, right, because the priest would use it to perform the sacrifices. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto the Lord Yahweh of hosts. And all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them, and seethe therein. And in that day there shall be no more the Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. So pretty much everything is going to be made holy. Even the common things are going to be made holy and sanctified. And there's going to be no more Canaanite, right? Those that are unholy, heathens, or any of those in the house of the Lord. Okay, so everything is going to be put back into its proper and natural order, where you have the Most High, the earth is a paradise again, Yahweh Shai is ruling, the nation of Israel, starting with the elect, are ruling. Our temple is beautiful, right? Which we're going to be that temple. And everything is going to be set back up in the righteous order, holy, right, as the Lord had set it up from the beginning. And that is pretty much the end of the book of Zechariah, the 14th chapter, and the end of the book of Zechariah. So, as we went through, there were a lot of different chapters that, a majority of the verses are not written in a direct way. Okay, they're written in some are dark sayings, some are parabolic, some are analogical, right? If that's the correct word there. But it's all a good portion of it was prophetic, right? Relating to the things that would happen in the future, primarily in our time now, but some things also happened during the time of Yahweh Shai and at different points in history. Okay, so Lord willing, this is edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakah, Kudash. Until next time, Shalom.